haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
Stars died quietly at the rim of the galaxy, their final light scattering like crushed glass across a sea of black. Worlds, once proud with banners of the Imperium, now drifted in silence, their orbiting stations dark and hollow, their Vox relays hissing with ghosts of long abandoned codes. In that fading light the Alpha Legion moved, a serpent threading the ruins of loyalty, each scale glimmering with a different truth. To most, this was simply another border of forgotten war, but to them it was a stage upon which the future of the heresy might tilt. Among the flickering asteroids and derelict monoliths, Alfarius watched from the viewing platform of his flagship, the cipher of prophecy resting like a weight in his gauntlet. He was a figure carved from midnight steel and subtlety, a Primarch built for deception, yet even he felt the gravity of what lay ahead. "We truly love and care for you," the hidden voice of his legion whispered, the echo of 1,000 operatives sworn to a cause that shifted like smoke. "Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started." The Primarch's eyes were fixed on the dimming corona of a dying sun beyond the bridge's void glass. It pulsed weakly, throwing embers into the void like the breath of an old god. Each pulse marked the death of another loyalist outpost, another cipher cracked, another trust broken. He thought of the mortal cryptographer aboard his flagship, the one whose hands trembled over the code keys, but whose mind never faltered. She had built him a lattice of lies so perfect it even ensnared his own thoughts. He wondered if she, too, questioned the morality of their war. To the Imperium, this sector was a footnote in an endless campaign. To Alfarius, it was a crucible where deception might finally outpace truth. He walked the length of the strategium, his footfalls silent over the inlaid serpentine mosaics. Each tile bore a fragment of the Legion's hidden history, a story told only to those who could read between lines. At the center, the hololithic display glimmered with shifting green projections. Loyalist fleet movements, intercepted communiques, and phantom assets planted by his agents. The map looked like a Hydra's head snapping at itself, a fitting omen. His voice, when he spoke, was low enough to be mistaken for thought. "We coil not to constrict," he murmured, "but to shape the strike." Outside the viewports, wrecked asteroids drifted like skeletal remains. On one, a cathedral tower still jutted into space, its spires cracked but its stained glass intact. Alfarius imagined the prayers once spoken there, now replaced by coded transmissions and misdirection. He wondered, as he often did, if any of this war still belonged to him. Did he command the Legion, or did the Legion's myth command him? Immortality of reputation was a curse as heavy as any armor. The Hydra icon etched across his chestplate seemed to shift in the dim light, its many heads watching him with silent accusation. He remembered the first time he had held the prophecy cipher, a device older than the heresy, recovered from a tomb on a nameless moon. It had whispered of a war that would consume brothers, of a choice hidden within choices. Its surface was etched with patterns that rearranged themselves when touched, revealing deeper meanings only to those willing to betray their own certainties. Now, on the eve of his greatest operation, he felt the cipher's weight like a second heart. It pulsed faintly in his palm, as if alive. A whisper of static broke his reverie. The cryptographer's voice came over the private vox, calm but edged with fatigue. "My lord, the latest intercepts confirm the Loyalist fleet is en route to the Hecate Drift. Your diversion has taken hold." Alfarius closed his eyes, imagining her pale hands hovering over the keys, the tension in her shoulders, the doubt she tried to hide. He had chosen her precisely for that doubt. A mind without cracks cannot be reshaped. "Maintain the pattern," he replied. "Let them believe what they wish to believe." His words felt like ash on his tongue. Every lie told was a strand in a net he might never escape. He turned back to the viewing platform. In the void, his ships formed silent constellations of war, sleek hulls bristling with hidden ports, Vox arrays masked as devotional shrines, hull markings altered hourly. They were ghosts even before the battle began. In their holds, legionaries meditated in darkness, repeating the oath of silent brothers, their voices a low susurrus beneath the thrum of engines. They believed in the plan, because belief was demanded. Alfarius envied their certainty. A tremor ran through the deck as the flagship shifted course. Ahead lay the drift, a corridor of debris, warp scars, and old battles. Navigating it required more than charts. It required intuition and a willingness to vanish. Alfarius watched as the dying sun's light dimmed behind them, swallowed by the dark. In that moment, he felt the weight of every life his deception would claim. Mortals, Astartes, even Primarchs, all pawns in a game whose board was larger than any one of them. He wondered if immortality was not living forever, but being forever misunderstood. He descended from the strategium into the inner sanctum, a chamber lit only by the glow of the cipher in his hand. Its shifting patterns cast hydra-headed shadows on the walls. He placed it on the altar-like pedestal at the room's center. The patterns flickered, rearranging into a symbol he had never seen before, a coiled serpent devouring its own tail, a warning or a promise. Alfarius felt a rare chill beneath his armor. "So it begins," he whispered. Above him, unseen by mortal eyes, the warp stirred. Threads of fate tangled with threads of lies, making a tapestry too vast for comprehension. Somewhere far away, a loyalist admiral plotted a counterstroke. Somewhere closer, a rival within his own legion whispered dissent. And aboard his flagship, the cryptographer traced the edges of forbidden knowledge, her loyalty poised to tilt either way. The galaxy was a board of shadows and shifting masks, and in the center stood a man who might be hero, traitor, or both. The fleet accelerated, engines humming like distant thunder. Alfarius straightened, feeling the eyes of his legion upon him even across light years. He thought of the old imperial ideal, unity through truth, and felt a pang like memory of childhood. That truth was gone, replaced by a serpent's path. Yet perhaps, he mused, deception could birth a truth greater than the one it destroyed. He clenched his gauntlet around the railing, watching the drift loom closer. As the flagship entered the corridor of wreckage and warp storms, the dying light behind them flickered once more, then vanished. Only darkness lay ahead. Alfarius allowed himself one final thought before sealing his helm, that in the end, even the most hidden of legions cannot hide from itself. His visor snapped shut with a hiss, his reflection fragmenting into a dozen green ghosts across the cipher's glow. The operation had begun, and with it, the unraveling of everything he had built. The void between stars was a hall of mirrors. In it, the Alpha Legion wove illusions so dense that even they sometimes lost the thread. Their ships glided through the Hecate drift like needles stitching a tapestry of deception, their hulls cloaked in false ident codes and refracted signals. On the flagship's command deck, Alfarius stood before the hololithic display, its shifting glyphs casting green light across his face. Behind every moving icon lay a living being, and behind every being a choice. He thought of the cryptographer again, the mortal whose fingers made this web possible. She was a cipher within a cipher, a mind brilliant enough to see patterns but still human enough to question them. If one thread frayed, the whole design would collapse. Below decks, she sat in the cold glow of her console, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but steady with resolve. Her name was Athea Chiron, though few aboard knew it. To most she was simply the Weaver. Around her, data slates formed concentric circles like votive offerings, each filled with intercepted messages, altered manifests, and fabricated orders. Her breath fogged in the recycled air. She had built an empire of lies with these hands, and yet she still whispered the Imperial creed under her breath, a memory of childhood she could not shake. In the hum of engines, her whisper sounded like prayer. Alfarius descended into the code chamber without herald. The legionaries on guard melted into shadows, recognizing their Primarch's stride. Athea did not look up immediately. She was rewriting a sequence of fleet orders meant for a loyalist admiral. "My lord," she said softly when she sensed him. "The diversion holds. They chase ghosts across the rim." Her voice carried both pride and a question. Alfarius stepped behind her, studying the flickering glyphs over her station. "And yet you hesitate," he murmured. She stiffened. "I sometimes wonder if the ghosts will find their way back to us." He said nothing for a long time. The hum of data streams filled the silence. Finally, he placed a gauntleted hand beside her console, not quite touching her. "We are shadows, Athea. Shadows cast by a light too bright to face directly. We move where others dare not." She turned then, eyes meeting his visor. "But shadows still come from something real," she whispered. He almost smiled, or thought he did. "Then hold to whatever is real for you," he said. "But hold the pattern, or all will burn." He left her with that, the sound of his steps fading into the corridor like a retreating tide. Elsewhere on the flagship, another conversation unfolded in a darker register. Praetor Kyrios Varn, Alfarius's oldest lieutenant, stood in a sealed chamber with 3 other captains. Their armor bore the same Hydra icon, but their eyes did not. "He trusts a mortal with our lifeblood," Varn hissed, "and he feeds us riddles while the heresy devours brothers." The captains shifted uneasily. They had followed Alfarius into lies within lies, but the toll was showing. "Perhaps," one ventured, "the Primarch sees a path we cannot." Varn's lips curled. "Or perhaps he has become lost in his own maze." In the gloom, a hollow projector displayed a secret channel to a loyalist contact, a seed of betrayal waiting to sprout. In the training decks, legionaries drilled in silence, their movements precise as code. Each brother knew only fragments of the operation, trusting the whole to be greater than its parts. Yet doubt crept like frost through the ranks. Some had begun carving confessions into the bulkheads where no one would see, as if the ship itself might carry their last truths. One knelt before a dim shrine, helmet off, whispering to a god he was no longer sure existed. The Alpha Legion's strength had always been secrecy. Now secrecy felt like a weight crushing their chests. Back in the code chamber, Athea traced the flow of false orders, fingers trembling only when no one could see. She had intercepted a fragment of communication between Varn and an unknown node. The message was oblique, but its intent clear: a leak. She saved it under a cipher only she could read, heart pounding. Betrayal nested inside betrayal. She imagined the Primarch's face when he discovered it, the stillness before the strike. A part of her wanted to tell him immediately. Another part feared what he would do. Alfarius returned to the strategium, standing alone before the Hydra-shaped map. He sensed the currents shifting, unseen hands moving pieces on his board. Was this the prophecy fulfilling itself? The cipher lay on the console, its patterns restless, rearranging into a symbol that looked almost like a question mark. He reached out, tracing it with a gauntleted finger. "Not yet," he whispered to no one. He felt the gaze of his legion even in solitude. Their faith, their doubt, their expectation of control. Control was an illusion, but it was one he had to maintain. Outside, the fleet executed its feints with flawless precision. Phantom squadrons lured loyalists into dead systems, while hidden cells sabotaged supply routes. The war, for now, was being fought in silence. Yet Alfarius's thoughts were not silent. He remembered the Emperor's face, stern, radiant, inscrutable, and wondered if the man had ever truly seen him. Immortality, he mused, was not living forever, but carrying the burden of being unseen, a serpent without a name winding through endless night. Athea's message icon blinked once, then again. She opened the secure channel and read Varn's latest transmission. It chilled her. Coordinates of the flagship's next position, offered as a gesture to a loyalist admiral. She closed the channel, heart hammering. The weight of choice pressed on her. She could expose Varn and risk shattering the Legion's fragile cohesion, or she could keep silent and watch them walk into an ambush. In that moment she realized she was no longer simply weaving the Primarch's lies. She was holding the knife that could cut the thread. On the lower decks, Varn prepared his next step. He justified it as salvation. By betraying Alfarius, he might save the Legion from itself. In his chamber, a small icon of the Imperial Aquila lay hidden beneath a cloth, a relic of a past he claimed to have abandoned. He touched it before sealing his armor, feeling the cool metal like a memory of sunlight. "Forgive me," he muttered, though whether to the Emperor, Alfarius, or himself, he did not know. Alfarius felt the shift before any report reached him. A tension in the air, a pattern misaligned. He looked again at the cipher. Its symbols had coiled into a new shape, a serpent striking its own heart. He closed his eyes. The heresy was a labyrinth with no exit, and he had led his legion deeper than any. Yet even in the labyrinth, there were choices. He opened his eyes and summoned Athea to the strategium. When she entered, pale but composed, he spoke softly. "There is something you have not told me." Her breath caught. "Yes, my lord," she whispered. "There is." The chapter ends as the two stand before the Hydra map, shadows merging and diverging in the green glow. Outside, the fleet glides toward its next deception, unaware that within its heart, two different betrayals are unfolding. Masks within masks, each hiding a face that no longer remembers its own. Darkness filled the training decks like a second atmosphere. It pressed against the walls, dampened every sound, and turned each legionary's breath into a mist of ghosts. Here, far below the strategium and code chambers, the Alpha Legion prepared itself in silence. Rows of armoured figures knelt upon the deck, their helms bowed, their bolters laid out like offerings before an unseen altar. The only light came from faint green lumen strips that pulsed in rhythm with the ship's heart, casting serpentine shadows across the walls. This was where their true bond lived, not in war councils or coded orders, but in the ritual that none outside the Legion had ever witnessed. The oath of silent brothers. Athea Chiron stood behind a sealed observation slit, watching as the ceremony began. She had been summoned here by Alfarius himself, though he had not said why. Her fingers rested lightly on the glass, feeling the vibration of hundreds of voices chanting without sound. Their lips moved, but no breath escaped. The oath was spoken entirely within, a vow sealed in the mind and carried in the blood. She felt like an intruder, a mortal standing on the edge of a mystery too vast for comprehension. Yet she also felt a tremor of awe. In this hush, she glimpsed the Legion's soul, if such a thing could be said to exist. Alfarius entered the chamber through a side passage, his armor blackened to a matte sheen, Hydra icon muted. He moved among his sons like a shadow among shadows, pausing before each squad, resting a gauntleted hand on a bowed helm. The legionaries did not look up. They felt him pass like a current in deep water. When he reached the central dais, he lifted his helm and placed it upon the altar. The faint light caught his features, showing lines of weariness seldom seen by outsiders. Athea saw it and felt an ache she did not expect. He was a Primarch, yes, but also a man burdened by the weight of secrets. The ritual reached its crescendo. Each legionary drew a dagger of dull, unadorned steel from his belt and nicked the flesh beneath the armor seal at his wrist. A single drop of blood fell onto the deck, vanishing before it could stain. In silence, they pressed their hands to the Hydra etched into the floor, sealing their vow. Athea felt the weight of it like a pressure in her chest. This was no simple pledge of loyalty. It was a binding of identity. Each man was both himself and not himself, a node in a vast and shifting network. Alfarius spoke then, his voice a low ripple that barely disturbed the hush. Brothers, shadows, we are the unseen hand, the whisper behind the command, the serpent in the tall grass. We coil not for conquest, but for correction. In silence, we find unity, and in unity, power. His eyes swept over them, catching glints of hidden doubts behind their visors. Remember this. Secrecy is not an end, but a means. We deceive so that truth may live. Athea caught her breath. The words were almost tender, almost a confession. Yet she also noticed movement at the edges of the crowd. Praetor Van stood slightly apart, helm tilted downward, his gauntlets clenched. Even in this sacred moment, his posture radiated tension. Athea's pulse quickened. She knew of his transmissions. She knew he had already betrayed coordinates to the Loyalists. Watching him now, she sensed not triumph, but anguish. Perhaps he believed his betrayal a form of salvation. In this chamber of silent vows, she wondered whose oath would prove stronger. The legionaries rose as one, their movements synchronized as if guided by an unseen conductor. They retrieved their bolters, sealed their armor, and filed out without a word. The ritual was complete. Alfarius remained on the dais, head bowed, as though gathering himself. Athea hesitated before approaching. The hiss of the door sealing behind the last legionary left them alone in the vast chamber. "You wanted me to see this," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, not looking up. "I wanted you to understand what you are helping to shape." She stepped closer, feeling the cold of the deck through her boots. "They believe in you," she whispered. "They believe in something," he corrected. "Belief is a weapon sharper than any blade." He turned then, his eyes meeting hers. But every weapon cuts both ways. She thought of the file hidden under her cipher key, the proof of Van's treachery. She thought of the countless lives depending on the web she maintained. "How many blades are hidden in this legion?" she asked. He almost smiled. "Enough to cut through fate itself, or to cut our own throat." They left the chamber together, walking side by side down a corridor lined with etched hydras. The deck vibrated with the thrum of the fleet changing course, ghosting deeper into the drift. Alpharius's stride was slow, measured, as if each step carried a memory. "When I founded this oath," he said, "I believed secrecy would protect us from corruption. But secrecy breeds its own hunger. It devours trust." His voice dropped lower. "Sometimes I fear I have created a legion of masks with no faces beneath." Athea said nothing. She had seen enough patterns to know when silence was the wiser response. Later, in her quarters, she unsealed the hidden file again. Varna's coordinates glimmered like a toxin on her screen. The decision she had postponed was now a living thing, coiled and waiting. She could take it to Alpharius tonight. She could save the Legion from an ambush, or trigger a purge that might tear it apart from within. She pressed her palms to her eyes, feeling the sting of exhaustion. Outside her viewport, the stars drifted past, indifferent and ancient. Meanwhile, in a secluded hangar, Varn met with two captains who still followed him. Their armor was scuffed, their eyes shadowed. "The Primarch has lost his way," Varn told them. "We swore an oath to the Imperium, not to his riddles. One clean strike now may save countless lives." One captain hesitated. "But we swore another oath here, Praetor. The oath of silent brothers." Varn's face hardened. "I know. That's why this must be done quickly, before doubt spreads." He handed them data slates with orders that bore Alpharius's sigil, perfect forgeries. The captains exchanged glances, torn between obedience and doubt. In the strategium, Alpharius studied the cipher again. Its shifting patterns now formed a hydra shedding its skins, one after another, until nothing remained but a coiled question. He traced it slowly, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. The prophecy's next line burned in his mind. When the serpent devours itself, the end begins. He closed his hand over the device. Shadows moved all around him. Athea's hidden knowledge, Varn's secret plot, the legionaries' unspoken doubts. He wondered if even now some greater player was moving him like a piece on a board he could not see. As the fleet glided deeper into the drift, the stars outside grew dimmer, scattered like embers from a dying fire. Inside, the tension coiled tighter, invisible but palpable. The oath of silent brothers had bound them together, but it had also bound them to choices none could escape. Alpharius stood alone at the viewport, watching a comet of ice and debris drift past, its tail a silver serpent in the dark. In its reflection, he saw not his own face, but 1,000 masked visages staring back. He whispered to the void, "Who are we when the masks fall?" No answer came, only the hiss of recycled air and the pulse of engines carrying them toward a destiny neither oath nor silence could undo. The Hecate drift ended in a wound of stars. Beyond its edge, the void folded inward on itself, where ancient battles had torn the veil between real space and the Imperium. There the warp bled through like ink from a cracked vessel, staining space with currents no chart could predict. The Alpha Legion called it the Corridor of Whispers, a passage of living storms and phantom voices that had devoured fleets without trace. Yet to reach their next objective, they had to pass through it, and so Alpharius stood on his flagship's forward bridge, watching the impossible horizon bloom. Veils of green and violet light writhed across the void, twisting into shapes that mimicked ships, faces, entire cities. Some glimmered with the beauty of auroras, others clawed at the senses like talons of memory. Alpharius's warriors had sealed their helms and muted their vox channels to keep the whispers out. Even so, a faint susurrus filled the bridge, as if the corridor itself were speaking. Alpharius touched the cipher on his belt and felt it pulse faintly, echoing the storm outside. It had begun to change again, its patterns forming a braided cord, threads of fate or threads of lies. Athea Chiron sat at her console, pale but steady, fingers dancing over control runes as she recalibrated navigation data every few seconds. The warp currents shifted faster than any machine could predict. Only her pattern sense, half logic, half instinct, kept them from sliding into a maelstrom. She whispered calculations under her breath, like incantations. She had not slept in 2 cycles, but she would not ask for relief. She felt the corridor's pressure like a weight on her skull, images flashing at the edge of vision. Her homeworld burning, alphabets rearranging, a hydra coiling around a sun. Praetor Varn watched her from across the bridge, his visor reflecting the warp's shifting light. The forgeries he had sent to the Loyalists lay encoded in a hidden channel, waiting to bloom into ambush. Yet as he stood here, feeling the corridor's murmur seep into his mind, doubt bit deeper. Was this salvation or damnation? In the storm's glow he saw visions, himself kneeling before the Emperor, himself striking down Alpharius, himself lost among faceless legionaries. Their oath of silent brothers pressed against his conscience like a blade held in place. He clenched his fists and forced his mind to stillness. Alpharius moved among his crew with measured steps. Each station he passed, he spoke a quiet word, a nod, a glance, reminders of presence amid the unreality beyond the hull. When he reached Athea's station, he placed a gauntlet on the console's edge. "You feel it," he said. Not a question. She nodded once, eyes never leaving the readouts. "It's like trying to thread a needle while the fabric dissolves," she murmured. "Every time I plot a course, the pattern shifts." He leaned closer. "Trust the instinct beneath the numbers. The corridor reveals what we bring into it." Her fingers paused. "And what do you bring, my lord?" He did not answer. The flagship entered the first warp scar, like a ship sliding through a veil of oil. Outside, the stars vanished, replaced by a roiling ocean of light and shadow. Shapes moved within it, colossal serpents, vast eyes opening and closing, memories of wars that had never happened. The hull shuddered as unseen currents gripped it. On the lower decks, legionaries knelt in their cells, reciting the oath in silence to anchor themselves. Some pressed blades to their palms, drawing blood as proof of reality. One whispered a name he had not spoken since youth, a secret tether to his mortal past. Athea's console flickered. A pattern emerged among the noise, 3 identical signals ahead, each claiming to be the exit point of the corridor. Only one could be real. The others would lead into traps of impossible geometry. She swallowed, calculating trajectories at a speed that blurred vision. Alpharius watched her, expression unreadable. "Choose," he said. She hesitated, feeling the warp's whispers curling around her thoughts. A voice that sounded like her own murmured a coordinate. Another voice, softer, warned her away. She closed her eyes and pressed a rune. The flagship veered sharply, engines howling as they took the middle path. The storm screamed. For an instant the bridge was filled with images, fields of bones under a green sky, a child writing alphabets of fire, a hydra devouring a comet. The sound vanished as suddenly as it came. Athea gasped, realizing she had been holding her breath. Alpharius's hand remained steady on the railing. "Well done," he said quietly. She almost laughed, but it came out as a shiver. Behind them, Varn opened a private channel to his co-conspirators on the escort ships. Static hissed, then resolved into a whisper that was not their voice. "We see you," it said, echoing his own thoughts. He cut the channel, heart hammering. In the warp, nothing was private. Even betrayal had witnesses. He glanced at Alpharius's back and wondered if the Primarch already knew. Hours stretched like years as the fleet threaded the corridor. Alpharius retreated to his private sanctum, the cipher glowing on its pedestal. Its patterns now resembled a loom weaving and unweaving itself, threads breaking and reforming. He stared at it until his vision blurred, then saw within it an image of himself standing at a crossroads, one path lined with the corpses of his brothers, the other with shadows that wore his own face. He closed his eyes. "Not yet," he whispered, echoing the words he had spoken before. The warp's whispers seemed to answer. "Now." Athea came to him unbidden, still pale from her station. "We will clear the corridor soon," she said. "But—" She hesitated. "There's a pattern in the interference. It's like a message hidden under the noise. It says—" She stopped, shaking her head. "It says Hydra uncoiled." Alpharius looked at her for a long moment. "Keep that to yourself," he said. His voice was gentle but final. On the outer decks, legionaries repaired minor hull breaches caused by phantom impacts. One paused to look out a viewing slit and saw his reflection replaced by another's face, a brother who had died decades ago. He slammed his visor shut and whispered the oath. In the corridor of whispers, even memory was a weapon. Finally, the warp light ahead began to thin, revealing the distant glimmer of real space. The fleet accelerated toward it, engines burning with relief. Yet Alpharius felt no relief. He sensed the pattern tightening, the net drawing in. Vahn's betrayal lay coiled within his legion like a hidden toxin, and the warp had shown him glimpses of outcomes he could not yet name. He wondered if any path he chose would lead to salvation, or if every path was already a trap designed by forces older than the heresy. As the flagship burst from the corridor into the cold clarity of real space, the whispers fell silent. Behind them, the wound in the stars closed like an eye. Ahead lay the fortress moon of their next operation, its surface bristling with defences, its comm beacons broadcasting prayers to the Emperor. Alpharius stood at the viewport, helm under one arm, and watched the distant lights flicker. He thought of the Hydra etched into his armour, of the cipher's shifting patterns, of Athea's pale face and Vahn's clenched fists. Threads in the warp, threads in the Legion, threads in his own heart, all knotted and waiting to be pulled. "Prepare the cells," he ordered softly. "We strike at dusk of their belief." His voice carried across the bridge like a ripple over still water. Athea returned to her console without a word. Vahn bowed his head, hiding his eyes. Outside, the fortress moon loomed larger, unaware that both salvation and ruin approached cloaked in the same shadow. In the silent moment before new orders fell, Alpharius touched the cipher one last time. It was warm, almost alive, its patterns forming a hydra whose heads were unravelling into loose strands. He wondered if the prophecy was not about the Imperium at all, but about himself, about a man who built a labyrinth so perfect he could not find the exit. The thought passed like a shadow. He straightened, voice calm, every inch the master of deception. "Begin phase 2, he said. Night on a void ship was only a matter of dimmed lumen strips and muted vox traffic. Yet something in the flagship's silence felt heavier than before. The Alpha Legion fleet had emerged from the corridor of whispers without a scar, but the storm had left its imprint. Men moved a little slower in the corridors. Helm lenses glowed a little dimmer. In the strategium, the hololithic map pulsed with new targets. In the code chambers, hidden currents of doubt began to surface. For Athea Chiron, the silence was a living thing that pressed against her skin as she walked back to her station. She had spent 2 days decrypting, falsifying and weaving, but the warp had given her something she had not expected, a pattern she could not ignore. The files she had hidden beneath a triple cipher flickered on her slate like a forbidden relic. Coordinates, names, a praetor's sigil forged into betrayal. She had read it again and again, hoping the pattern would shift into something innocent, but it did not. Each time she decrypted it, the meaning sharpened. Varn had given the flagship's course to the Loyalists. The ambush lay coiled just ahead. She pressed her palms to the slate as though she could smother the truth back into numbers. Outside the viewport, the fortress moon grew larger, a dark pearl threaded with light. She felt as though it watched her. Alfarius summoned her without preamble. She found him alone in his sanctum. Helm off, the cipher glowing on its pedestal. Shadows of its shifting symbols crawled over his armor like living runes. He did not look up when she entered. "You have not slept," he said. "No," she answered. "I see patterns when I close my eyes." He turned then, his expression unreadable. "And what do they tell you?" She hesitated, sensing a precipice beneath the question. "They tell me someone has betrayed you." The words tasted like iron. His gaze sharpened, but his voice remained soft. "Show me." She placed the slate on the pedestal beside the cipher. The two devices pulsed in unison, patterns overlaying each other until they formed a hydra's head with one fang missing. Alfarius studied it for a long moment. The only sound was the thrum of the ship's heart. "Varn," he said at last, as if naming a wound. He did not curse, did not rage. He merely closed his gauntlet over the slate and let the projection fade. "How sure are you?" "Sure enough to risk this," she whispered. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of him, but from the weight of choice. "I should have told you earlier, but He lifted a hand, stopping her. "You told me now. That is enough." His tone was neither gratitude nor reprimand, but something quieter, heavier. "Does he know you have seen this?" "No," she said. "Then keep it that way." He turned back to the cipher, its symbols now unraveling into a spiral. "We will act, but on our terms." Athea left his sanctum with her heart hammering. She had expected relief. Instead, she felt as though she had stepped deeper into a labyrinth. The corridors seemed narrower, the lumen strips dimmer. Legionaries passed her without a glance, their armor whispering against the deck. She wondered how many masks each of them wore, and whether any face beneath was still their own. She reached her quarters and sat in the dark, staring at her hands. They had built an empire of lies, and now they had struck at its heart. She whispered a fragment of the Imperial Creed, but the words fell flat. In a secluded hangar, Varn was preparing his strike. His forgeries had been sent, his contacts primed. The Loyalist fleet would arrive within hours, drawn by the promise of a Primarch's blood. He justified it again in his mind. A clean decapitation to save the Legion from the abyss. Yet as he sealed his helm, he felt the corridor's whispers echoing still. Images of his brothers bleeding silently on the deck. He touched the Aquila hidden beneath his armor, feeling its edges bite his palm. "Forgive me," he murmured, voice muffled by ceramite. "Forgive us all." Alfarius returned to the strategium, the cipher at his side. The hololithic map bloomed before him, a green hydra coiling around the fortress moon. He studied the trajectories, seeing where Vaughn's leak would guide the Loyalists. Every move, every lie, every feint, threads converging on a single point. He could spring the trap Vaughn intended, but in doing so, he would reveal the traitor too soon. Or he could turn the ambush into a deeper deception, sacrificing pieces to save the whole. Immortality, he thought, was not endless life, but endless decisions with no clean end. On the lower decks, legionaries drilled without orders, their movements crisp, but eyes shadowed. The oath of silent brothers still bound them, but they felt the tremor in the ship's pulse. Some whispered that the warp had shown their Primarch his death. Others carved hydras into the walls as if to anchor themselves. In their cells, they repeated the oath, not knowing whether they swore to truth or to lies. Athea returned to her consul and began weaving new orders under Alpharius's silent direction. Each transmission she altered was a needle pushing another thread into the tapestry. She did not know the full pattern. Perhaps no one did. But she sensed its shape. A coiling reversal. A deception hidden inside a betrayal. As she worked, she felt Vaughn's gaze from across the bridge. He stood with arms folded, visor dark. She wondered if he suspected her. Their eyes met for an instant, and in that instant she saw no hatred, only a bleak resolve. The hours crawled. The fortress moon loomed closer, its defense grids awakening. Loyalist fleet signals began to flicker at the edge of detection. The trap was closing, but upon whom? Alpharius stepped to the viewport, helm under his arm. The dying light of the moon's sun reflected off his armor, making the Hydra seem alive. Phase 2 begins, he said softly, and the bridge crew moved like parts of a single organism. Below, in a chapel-like maintenance bay, a lone legionary lit a scrap of wax and whispered a prayer for clarity. The flame guttered and went out, leaving only the hum of engines. In that moment, the ship felt like a cathedral built for a god of secrets, every corridor an aisle, every console an altar. Athea felt the weight of it pressing on her. She had chosen a side, but in the Alpha Legion sides were only layers of masks. She wondered what face she would wear when the masks fell. Vaughn had closed his private channel for the last time. The Loyalists were coming. The coordinates were sent. He felt both lighter and heavier, like a man stepping off a ledge. He thought of the oath, of Alpharius's hand on his shoulder at initiation, of the belief that had once burned like a star, all gone now, replaced by a grim necessity. He whispered a final phrase into the dark. Hydra uncoiled. On the bridge, alarms whispered of incoming signatures. Athea's fingers hovered over the controls. Alpharius raised his helm and sealed it with a hiss, his reflection fracturing into a dozen green ghosts on the viewport. The moment had come when deception would turn on itself, when the cryptographer's revelation and the praetor's betrayal would collide. Outside, the fortress moon bristled with light, and beyond it the Loyalist fleet emerged from the void like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Alpharius's voice was calm, carrying over the rising hum of engines. Hold positions. Let them believe. Athea swallowed hard, her heart a drumbeat in the hush. She had unmasked the betrayal, but in the Alpha Legion nothing was simple. Truth was only another tool, and every tool cut both ways. She wondered if she had saved them or doomed them. The ship vibrated as the first ripple of warp shadows washed over it. Outside, fleets maneuvered like chess pieces, each move predicted, countered, anticipated. Inside, 3 people held the future of the Legion in their hands. A Primarch, a Praetor, and a mortal cryptographer who had just crossed the line between witness and participant. Masks were slipping. The Hydra's heads were turning on each other. And in the silent heart of the flagship, the cipher pulsed like a second heart, weaving patterns too complex for any one mind to hold. The first pulse of enemy fire came as a flash of silent light across the void. It blossomed from the Loyalist fleet like a wound opening in space, streaking toward the Alpha Legion flotilla with cold precision. The flagship's void shields absorbed the impact in a shimmer of green, but the tremor ran through the decks like a heartbeat. In that instant, Alfarius knew the trap had been sprung, not his, but Vahn's. Yet he also knew he had prepared for this moment, weaving his own deception around the betrayal like a second skin. On the bridge, he stood still, helm sealed, watching the hololithic map fracture into dozens of hostile vectors. Each line was a blade. Each blade had a name. Athea's fingers flew across her console. She had been rewriting orders under Alfarius's direction for hours, but now she saw the ambush in full. Loyalist ships emerged from warp shadows at precisely the coordinates Vahn had leaked. Their formation was a net thrown wide to close around the flagship. She tasted copper in her mouth, a phantom of fear. Alfarius's voice came low and steady. "Hold the pattern," he said. "Phase 3 begins now." She obeyed, sending out new signals, ghosting transponders, splitting the fleet into shadow images that flickered and vanished. Even under fire, the Legion moved like smoke. Praetor Vahn watched from the tactical rail, visor reflecting the chaos he had unleashed. He had expected a clean strike, a sudden decapitation of the Primarch and his command. Instead, he saw the fleet dissolving into phantoms, Loyalist augurs chasing false echoes. Alfarius had known. A slow dread filled him. His betrayal had become another layer of deception in the Primarch's labyrinth. The oath of silent brothers pulsed in his memory, a vow he had broken even as it bound him. He thought of the Aquila hidden under his armor and felt its edges cut deeper, like a brand of guilt. Alfarius moved to the center of the bridge. "Signal the vanguard cells," he ordered. "Initiate Hydra coil." At his word, hidden operatives embedded in the Loyalist flotilla activated sabotage protocols. False orders, sabotage munitions, delayed warp drives. The Loyalist formation faltered as ships turned on phantom allies, firing into empty space. Yet even as Alfarius watched, he felt no triumph. Every success was purchased with another lie, another soul pushed into darkness. He wondered how many more layers the Legion could bear before collapsing into nothing. Below decks, legionaries stormed into boarding craft under emergency lighting. Their armor bore no heraldry, their vox nets filled with coded whispers. Each squad carried partial knowledge of its mission. Only Alfarius knew the full pattern. In the hangar's echoing dark, a sergeant pressed his palm to the Hydra carved into the deck and whispered the oath. He did not know that his squad was a decoy meant to die drawing fire. He did not know that his Primarch whispered the same words in silence inside his helm. Athea intercepted a fragment of Vahn's secret channel, garbled now, but clear enough. "Abort. We were expected." The Praetor's voice, tight with fear. She looked across the bridge at him and saw a man unraveling. For a heartbeat, she almost pitied him. Then she remembered the coordinates, the trap, the thousands who might die because of him. Her fingers hovered over the control rune that would expose his transmissions to the entire bridge crew. But Alfarius had said nothing yet. Perhaps he was waiting for the right moment. Perhaps he was testing her. Vahn turned from the rail and met her eyes through his visor. In that instant, something passed between them. Recognition, despair, a plea unspoken. He moved his hand slightly, as if reaching for a weapon, then stopped. The ship shuddered again, as another barrage struck the shields. Outside, the fortress moon's defences flared to life, adding their fire to the chaos. Loyalist and Alpha Legion vessels tangled in a spiral of deception and counter-deception, like a hydra fighting its own heads. Alpharius's voice cut through the noise. "Bring him to me." 2 legionaries stepped forward at once, moving toward Varn. The praetor did not resist. He unsealed his helm slowly, revealing a face lined with exhaustion and something like sorrow. "You knew," he said to Alpharius. The Primarch inclined his head. "I knew." Varn's lips twitched into a bitter smile. "Then why let me?" "Because every pattern needs a fracture to reveal its shape," Alpharius replied, "and because I needed to know how far you would go." The words were calm, but his gauntlet tightened on the railing. Athea felt the tension in the bridge like a storm front. She expected Alpharius to strike Varn down then and there, but instead he gestured to the cipher on its pedestal. "Look," he commanded. Varn's eyes flicked to it. Its patterns had shifted into a dagger poised above a coiled serpent. "You held the knife," Alpharius said softly. But the knife was part of the cipher. Varn's breath caught. "Then nothing I did mattered." "Everything you did mattered," Alpharius answered, "but not in the way you thought." Outside, Loyalist ships began to explode from sabotage planted days ago. The net collapsed, leaving gaps the Alpha Legion exploited with surgical precision. Yet inside the flagship, time seemed to slow. Varn dropped to one knee, hands trembling. "I believed I was saving us," he whispered. "Perhaps you were," Alpharius said. "Perhaps you still are." He looked at Athea. "You revealed him." She swallowed. "I did what I thought was right." "So did he," Alpharius murmured. "So do we all." He turned back to Varn. "You will lead the boarding action on the fortress moon. Redeem yourself or die. Either way the pattern holds." Varn stared at him, then nodded once, as if accepting a verdict from a higher court. The legionaries escorted him from the bridge. Athea watched him go, feeling a hollow ache. In this legion, betrayal and obedience looked much the same. The flagship rolled to starboard, engines flaring as it cut through the chaos. Alpharius stood at the viewport, helm under his arm, eyes on the dying light of the fortress moon's sun. "Every choice a blade," he whispered. "Every blade a cipher." Athea stepped beside him, her hands still trembling. "How much longer can we keep weaving this?" she asked. "Until the threads run out," he said. On the lower decks, Varn armed himself for the boarding action. He touched the hidden Aquila one last time, then left it on the bunk like a confession. As the assault craft's doors closed, he whispered the oath of silent brothers, not knowing if he still believed it. The engines roared, carrying him toward the fortress moon and whatever fate awaited. Back on the bridge, Athea closed her console and looked at Alpharius. "Will he survive?" she asked. The Primarch did not answer. Outside, the fortress moon loomed larger, its defences burning like a crown of thorns. The Loyalist fleet reeled in confusion, shadows and echoes tearing it apart. Yet amid victory, the Legion's heart felt heavier. A knife had been found in the cipher, but perhaps the cipher itself was a knife. Alpharius sealed his helm once more. The green glow of its visor hid his eyes, but Athea sensed the weight behind them. He raised a hand and gave the next order, his voice calm and final. "Commence the strike." Engines thundered. The flagship plunged toward the fortress moon, carrying with it the tangled threads of loyalty, betrayal, and redemption, threads that might yet tighten into a noose around them all. The fortress moon of Calitha rose like a black wound against the dying star, its orbit thick with defense satellites and faith banners that fluttered in vacuum as if stirred by unseen breath. Below its crust lay vaults of encrypted archives the Alpha Legion had come to seize or destroy. Above it hung a web of confusion, spun by weeks of disinformation. Loyalist augurs read a dozen phantom fleets and half as many false distress calls. Only Alfarius knew which signals were real and which were smoke. On the flagship's bridge, the Hydra-shaped hololith pulsed, each head representing a strike group poised to coil around the moon. Athea Chiron's hands trembled over the keys, but her face stayed calm. She was weaving 3 layers of orders at once, one for the true strike teams, one for decoys, and one for ghosts that did not exist. Her mind felt like a loom stretched too tight. Images from the warp corridor still flickered at the edge of her vision. Alphabets of fire, a hydra unraveling. She pushed them away. The pattern mattered more than her own clarity. Outside the viewport, the first assault craft detached from the flagship, like dark scales falling from a serpent. Praetor Varn sat among the legionaries in one of those craft, his armor muted, his Aquila left behind. He had been given a chance at redemption or a death sentence disguised as duty. Around him, silent brothers checked weapons and seals, their eyes unreadable behind green lenses. Varna whispered the oath under his breath, not sure whether it was prayer or penance. The engines vibrated like a distant drumbeat as the craft dove toward the fortress moon's upper atmosphere, threading through gaps in the defense grid Alfarius had opened with sabotage weeks before. On the flagship, Alfarius stood at the center of the strategium, helm sealed, hands clasped behind his back. The cipher on the pedestal pulsed in rhythm with the moon's orbital beacons. Its patterns now resembled a serpent coiling around a tower, each loop a decision tightening on the next. He spoke in a low tone that carried across the bridge. Phase 4 begins. Cut the outer grid. Feed them our ghosts. At once the fleet split, half transmitting loyalist codes to draw fire, half vanishing behind stealth fields. Loyalist gunners struck at phantoms and decoys, their shots carving only empty space. The real strike team slid through the gaps like ink through cracks. Athea's console chimed softly. A new signal had appeared, an encrypted loyalist broadcast that did not match any known pattern. She decrypted it quickly, heart pounding. It was a plea for parley from a loyalist captain who claimed to know the Legion's true mission. She looked at Alfarius, unsure whether to speak. His visor turned toward her as if he felt her hesitation. Later, he said. The pattern first. She bit her lip and obeyed. Varn's craft entered the moon's upper atmosphere, skimming through storms of dust and electromagnetic fire. Below lay the target, a cathedral vault, where the Imperium stored intelligence on every legion. If captured or erased, it would change the course of the war. Varn's squad leapt from the craft as it skimmed the landing spire, grav chutes snapping open like black wings. They hit the deck in silence, bolters raised and advanced into the dim arches. The air tasted of iron and incense. Statues of saints loomed over them, their faces eroded into blankness. Varn felt their gaze like judgment. Back on the flagship, Alfarius watched the data feeds from hidden probes. The fortress moon's defenders were reacting exactly as predicted, rushing to repel phantom boarders while the real team slipped into the archives. Yet Alfarius's mind was not on victory, but on the cipher's latest shift. Its patterns had formed a question mark again, then dissolved into a spiral with no center. He wondered if every success brought them closer to a point of no return, where even he would no longer see the pattern. Athea continued weaving, her fingers numb. She inserted false casualty reports, forged surrender codes, and phantom retreat orders, each one designed to collapse the defenders' cohesion. Yet as she worked, she felt a strange kinship with Varn, out there among the silent brothers. Both of them were trapped in the same labyrinth, each holding a thread that might lead out or tighten the noose. She thought of the plea for parley still blinking on her console. Could there be another path, one not written in deception? She dared not ask. Inside the cathedral vault, Varn's squad moved like shadows between pillars. Servo skulls drifted overhead, their optics blind from sabotage. They reached the inner sanctum where data shrines pulsed with blue light. Here lay records of identities, ciphers, infiltrations, the Legion's true reflection. Varn hesitated. One bolt round here, one detonation, and all of it would vanish. Was that Alpharius's real goal or his own? He remembered the Primarch's words, redeem yourself or die. Perhaps the two were the same. Suddenly Loyalist defenders appeared at the far end of the hall, their armour bright with unbroken heraldry. They opened fire, bolts hammering pillars into dust. Varn's squad responded with disciplined bursts, advancing under the cover of debris. In the echoing chaos, Varn reached the main data shrine and placed a shaped charge against its core. His hands shook. He could destroy the records, erase every secret, or he could download them and hand the Imperium the Legion's heart. The charge's timer glowed like an eye. Hydra uncoiled, he whispered. On the flagship, Alpharius sensed the moment. His link to the cipher pulsed hot, patterns aligning into a shape he recognized. A knife poised at a Hydra's heart. He closed his eyes. This was the fulcrum on which all his threads balanced. Behind him, Athea finally spoke. My lord, the parley message. It says they know your plan. He opened his eyes, visor reflecting her pale face. Of course they do, he said softly. That too is part of the plan. Outside, the Loyalist fleet reeled in confusion as sabotage detonated on their hulls. Fire blossomed in the void like dying suns. Yet amid victory, the bridge felt heavy, as if the ship itself knew the cost. Alpharius placed a gauntlet on the cipher and whispered a single command code. In the cathedral vault, Varn's charge flickered and disarmed itself, replaced by a new directive on his visor. Extract data. Leave nothing behind. He stared at it, then at the defenders closing in. Redemption or damnation, the pattern was set. Varn signaled his squad. They switched from demolition to seizure, downloading data while fighting off waves of Loyalists. Bolter shells sparked against data shrines. Statues toppled, scattering fragments of nameless saints. Varn felt a bolt round graze his shoulder, armour cracking. He wondered if Alpharius had saved him or sentenced him. Yet his hands moved without hesitation, pulling cables, slaving cores, ripping the Imperium's secrets into the Legion's grasp. On the bridge, Athea watched the feed. She saw Varn fighting, saw legionaries falling, saw records pouring into encrypted channels. She looked at Alpharius and for the first time saw weariness behind the visor's glow. How many more patterns? She asked quietly. He did not answer. The cipher pulsed once, then dimmed, its patterns dissolving like sand. Outside, the fortress moon's defences flickered and died, its prayers cut short. The Alpha Legion had struck at dusk of their belief and found the archives bare of certainty. The strike was not yet over. Vaughn's squad began exfiltration under heavy fire, carrying data cores like relics. Above, assault craft swept in under stealth to retrieve them. Alfarius issued no further orders. He stood at the viewport, watching the dying light of the star paint his fleet green and gold. In his mind, he saw threads stretching out from this moment into futures he could not name. He wondered if he was still weaving, or if the tapestry had begun to weave him. Athea closed her console and let her hands fall to her lap. She felt as though she had passed through the warp again, her thoughts frayed at the edges. She thought of the parley message still unanswered, of Vaughn's haunted eyes, of Alfarius's calm voice. Shadows moved within shadows. She whispered the oath of silent brothers under her breath, not sure if it was a vow or a plea. On the fortress moon's surface, Vaughn limped toward the waiting craft, data cores strapped to his back. Loyalist fire chased him, but he did not falter. As the ramp closed behind him, he looked back once at the cathedral vault collapsing in flames. He felt lighter and heavier at once, as though a blade had cut through his chest without drawing blood. "Forgive me," he whispered again, though he no longer knew to whom. The assault craft rose, engines burning like green comets. Above, the Alpha Legion fleet coiled around the moon like a living serpent, its head striking, withdrawing, striking again. Operation Hydrocoil had begun, and with it, perhaps, the uncoiling of every secret they had built. Silence draped the fleet like a funeral shroud after the storm of Operation Hydrocoil. The fortress moon of Calithor burned behind them, its defense towers collapsing inward like candle wax in a slow wind. Outwardly, the Alpha Legion had triumphed. Archives seized, loyalist fleets scattered, operatives extracted. But within the holds of the returning craft, the air was thick with ghosts. Men sat motionless, armor scorched and visors dark, their breathing shallow and synchronized as if they feared to disturb the pattern of silence. The oath of silent brothers still bound them, yet it no longer felt like unity. It felt like weight. Athea Chiron walked the length of the debriefing bay, tablet in hand, recording the wounded and the dead. She had never stood so close to so many legionaries without their masks. Helmets lay at their feet like discarded identities. She saw faces streaked with ash and tears that would never be acknowledged. They avoided her gaze, as if afraid she might read their thoughts the way she read codes. Some muttered fragments of the oath under their breath. Others stared at nothing, lips pressed thin. For the first time she sensed not just obedience but weariness, a legion questioning itself in silence. Praetor Vaughn sat apart, his armor pitted from bolts and scorched by promethium. The data cores he had carried now lay on the deck beside him like black hearts. He cradled one gauntleted hand against his wounded shoulder, head bowed. Athea paused nearby, uncertain. She had exposed his betrayal, yet he had returned alive, fulfilling Alfarius's command. Was he now condemned or redeemed? She almost spoke but held back. His eyes flicked up briefly, and she saw no defiance there, only a hollow kind of relief, as if death had missed him by accident. Alfarius remained in his private sanctum, helm sealed, the cipher glowing faintly. Its patterns had grown dim since the strike, as if exhausted. They now resembled fading ripples on water, spreading outward until they dissolved. He traced them with a finger, feeling a rare tremor of doubt. Each operation, each deception, had been another loop in a coil tightening around his own heart. The prophecy had spoken of Hydra heads severed, of a serpent devouring itself. Watching his legion return, he wondered if the devouring had already begun. The Strategium's hololithic map displayed victory in elegant green arcs, but behind the symbols lay scattered cells, burned assets, operatives gone dark. Athea reported the numbers to Alfarius, her voice flat. He listened without interruption, then turned to the viewport. "Ghosts," he murmured. "We are becoming ghosts." She hesitated. "You built them to be ghosts," she said quietly. "You taught them masks, shadows, silence." His visor turned toward her. "I taught them to survive." "At what cost?" she asked before she could stop herself. The question hung between them like an unsheathed blade. Alfarius said nothing, but his hand tightened on the railing. On the lower decks, rituals of secrecy had begun to fray. Legionaries carved confessions into the metal of their bunks, lines of coded script that would dissolve under heat, but remained long enough to be read by those who dared. Others gathered in unlit corners, whispering doubts through modulated vox like contraband. They spoke of Vahn's betrayal and Alfarius's knowledge of it, of missions that no longer had clear purpose, of the creeping sense that they fought not for the Imperium or even the War Master, but for a labyrinth whose center was empty. Each whisper was another thread unraveling. Vahn moved through these corridors like a ghost himself. Some brothers turned their heads when he passed. Others pretended not to see. He felt their judgment like static under his skin. He had walked into the fortress moon expecting to die. Instead, he had returned carrying secrets that might damn them all. The Aquila he had left behind haunted him. Without it, he felt unmoored, a soldier without a creed. In his quarters, he opened one of the data cores, its glow casting long shadows on the walls. Lines of information scrolled past. Names of operatives, hidden cells, deeds never meant for daylight. He closed it quickly, sick at the thought of what he had saved. Athea could not sleep. She roamed the observation deck where the stars spilled like powdered glass across black velvet. Each glimmer reminded her of a life caught in the Legion's net, each pattern a choice disguised as inevitability. She thought of the Pali message still unanswered, now buried under layers of priorities. Someone out there had claimed to know the Legion's true mission. Was it another trap, or a thread leading out of the labyrinth? She pressed her forehead to the glass and whispered a prayer to any power that might be listening. The glass was cold. No answer came. Alfarius stood behind her, silent until she sensed him. "You should rest," he said. She straightened. "I can't. The patterns don't stop." He moved beside her, watching the drift of debris from Calithor glimmer like dying fireflies. "They never stop," he agreed. For a moment they simply stood there, two figures framed by the void. Then he said, "Do you regret telling me about Vahn?" She hesitated. "I don't know. It feels as though nothing changed." "Everything changed," he said, "but not where you can see it yet." His voice was low, almost gentle. "Do you regret saving him?" she asked. "Redemption is another mask," he replied. "Sometimes it hides a dagger, sometimes a wound. We will see which it is." Elsewhere in the fleet, funerary rites were performed without names or songs. Bodies too damaged for retrieval were vented into space, sealed in black shells that bore no sigils. They drifted behind the fleet like a constellation of lost truths. Legionaries watched from narrow viewports, hands pressed to the glass, whispering the oath one last time. Each shell was another secret consigned to the void. The fleet moved on, but a weight followed it like gravity. Vahn, sleepless, wandered into the chapel like maintenance bay, where a single lumen flickered. He knelt before a blank wall and pressed his forehead to the metal. "Forgive me," he whispered again. The words had lost meaning. but the act still grounded him. Behind his closed eyes, he saw the faces of those who had fallen in the Fortress Moon's halls, saw Athea's eyes as she revealed him, saw Alpharius's calm when he confessed. He wondered if the Primarch had already written his ending. The cipher on Alpharius's pedestal pulsed faintly, forming patterns no longer distinct, threads loosening, heads dissolving. He stared at it and saw not prophecy, but memory, the day he had sworn his legion to secrecy, believing it would protect them from corruption. Instead, it had woven them into a tapestry of ghosts. He placed his palm on the device and felt it cool under his touch, as if it were dying. "Not yet," he whispered, but the words felt thin. In the strategium, the hololith dimmed. Signals from several cells had gone dark without explanation. Whether destroyed or simply fading into deeper shadow, Alpharius could not tell. He turned to Athea. "We must prepare for the next phase," he said. She looked at him, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Another operation?" "Another mask," he replied. "Another coil." She wanted to protest, but found no words. The bridge seemed larger and emptier than before. Outside, the fleet sailed through stardust, left from battles no one would remember. Each ship a scale of a serpent, each scale carrying ghosts. The Hydra's heads moved but did not speak. Athea felt the silence pressing in, heavier than the void. She whispered the oath one more time, but this time it felt like a farewell. Alpharius remained at the viewport long after the others had gone. The stars reflected on his visor like 1,000 watching eyes. He wondered which of them were real, which were ghosts, which were memories of choices made long ago. The legion he had built was winning battles, but losing something he could not name. In the quiet, he thought of the prophecy. When the serpent devours itself, the end begins. Perhaps the devouring had already begun. Perhaps he was the first bite. He closed his eyes, hearing only the hum of engines and the silence of his silent brothers. The Alpha Legion fleet slid into the cold expanse beyond Calithor, leaving behind the burning Fortress Moon and the ghost that trailed it like a comet's tail. Around them stretched a region of space known to navigators as the Silver Veil, an expanse of dust-lit nebulae where signals bent and reflections multiplied. For Alpharius, it was the perfect arena for the next phase of his design. Here truth itself could be mirrored, doubled, inverted, until even the keenest auger lost its mark. Yet as the fleet coiled into new formations, the Primarch felt an unease, like a splinter under the skin. Victory had not cleansed the Legion. It had revealed its fractures. Athea Chiron sat at her console, her eyes fixed on cascading strings of false communiques. Each line represented a ship that might or might not exist. In the Silver Veil, she could paint entire flotillas out of light and noise. Ghosts chasing ghosts through a hall of mirrors. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind drifted. She thought of Vahn's hollow gaze, of legionaries whispering confessions in the dark, of Alpharius standing alone at the viewport. She wondered how long a tapestry of lies could hold before the threads cut the weaver's fingers. Praetor Vahn had been given no cell, no punishment. Instead, Alpharius had placed him in command of a decoy squadron, an honor or an exile, depending on one's view. Vahn now sat in a dim-lit command pod aboard a small stealth cruiser, his armor sealed, his heart heavy. Before him floated a hololithic projection of the Silver Veil's corridors, paths of dust and static where loyalist scouts prowled. His orders were simple: lead the enemy deeper into the labyrinth. Yet every time he transmitted a false signal, he felt as though he were betraying something fresh. The oath still whispered at the edge of his mind, a refrain he could not silence. Alfarius stood at the centre of the strategium, helm sealed, the cipher glowing on its pedestal. Its patterns had shifted again, now resembling a shattered mirror whose fragments each held a different reflection of the Hydra. He traced them slowly, sensing not clarity, but multiplicity. In the mirror war, there would be no single battlefield, no single outcome. Every move would echo in dozens of false theatres, each one as real as the next to those inside it. Deception had become not just a tactic, but an environment, a living labyrinth of his own making. He addressed the bridge crew in a low, measured tone. Initiate the phantoms. Let them see what we want them to see. Athea's fingers danced over the controls. All across the Silver Veil, ghost fleets bloomed like luminous jellyfish, squadrons of light and data shaped into credible warships, their signatures seeded with fragments of real transmissions. Loyalist augurs would read them as genuine, adjust their vectors, and chase them deeper into the maze. Real Alpha Legion craft shadowed these phantoms, striking only when confusion peaked. Already, reports came in of loyalist escorts firing on each other, convinced they had found the hidden serpent. Below decks, legionaries prepared for sudden strikes. Their armour bore no heraldry, their visors were blank. Yet even in their silence, doubts flickered. Some began marking small scratches on their armour, personal sigils hidden under grime, a way to remember who they had been before the masks. Others passed coded notes that contained not orders, but questions. In the dim armoury, a sergeant whispered to his squad, "Every target is a reflection. Remember that." One brother muttered back, "And what if we are?" Vahn's decoy squadron lured a loyalist cruiser into a pocket of static, where the phantoms multiplied. Sensors showed a dozen Alpha Legion ships closing from all sides. In panic, the loyalist captain opened fire on his own escorts, mistaking them for infiltrators. Vahn watched the chaos unfold with a numb heart. This was victory by reflection, a battle without battle, a war fought in mirrors. Yet as the loyalist cruiser vented flames, he saw faces at its viewports, mortal crew staring out into the void as their ship died around them. He looked away, gripping the Aquila-shaped scar on his palm. On the flagship, Athea detected a new anomaly. Among the phantom signatures bloomed one she had not created. A ship transmitting Alpha Legion codes, but with no origin in their roster. It moved with purpose, weaving through the maze as if guided by a hand equal to her own. She felt a chill. "My lord," she said, "there's an intruder in the mirror." Alfarius studied the data. The cipher pulsed faintly, its patterns aligning into twin hydras facing each other. "A reflection of a reflection," he murmured, "or a ghost of our own making." He ordered the intruder shadowed but not engaged. In the mirror war, striking at the wrong reflection could be fatal. Athea tracked it, heart racing. The ship's maneuvers matched Alpha Legion doctrine too perfectly to be imitation. Was it a lost cell gone rogue, or an enemy who had learned their pattern? She sent coded queries, but received only silence. Watching its path, she felt as though she was staring at her own hands moving on another console in some parallel theatre. Meanwhile, Vahn's squadron prepared to vanish into another dust corridor. Loyalist reinforcements had arrived, their augurs scrambled, their formations ragged. One of Vahn's captains spoke over a secure channel, voice tense. "Praetor, do we keep leading them? They're killing each other out there." Vahn closed his eyes. "We lead them," he said, until ordered otherwise. He ended the link and stared at the swirling static beyond the viewport. Each false signal he sent felt heavier, like stones piling on his chest. Alpharius moved from station to station, adjusting the pattern by hand, his presence anchoring the crew amid unreality. Yet he, too, felt the weight. The mirror war had become more than a strategy. It was a mirror of his own soul, fractured into reflections of loyalty, betrayal, necessity. He touched the cipher, feeling it cool and distant. "Every mirror shows a different truth," he murmured, "but none show the whole." Athea's anomaly drew closer to the flagship. Its codes shifted subtly, echoing her own encryption style. She felt an almost personal affront, as if someone had stolen her signature. "It's answering my moves," she whispered. Alpharius stood behind her, silent. She looked up at him. "What if it's us?" she asked. "Another cell? Another layer you forgot?" His visor glimmered. "I forget nothing," he said softly. But his hand on the cipher trembled once. In the Silver Veil's dust light, ghost fleets clashed with real ones, reflections tearing at reflections. Loyalist reports contradicted each other so wildly that command broke down. Some hailed Alpha Legion ships begging for parley. Others fired blindly into the void. Victory was unfolding exactly as Alpharius had planned. Yet inside the flagship, the atmosphere thickened like storm air before lightning. Doubts multiplied as fast as phantoms. Vahn's stealth cruiser flickered out of phase, preparing to rejoin the flagship. Before jumping, he sent a final transmission to Alpharius. "How much longer can we fight shadows?" No reply came. He closed the channel, feeling the words hang in static like a confession. On the bridge, Athea saw the anomaly ship vanish into a dust corridor, leaving behind a single encrypted burst. She captured it, decrypted it, and felt her blood run cold. The message was only 4 words. "Hydra has many hearts." She looked at Alpharius. "It knows us," she whispered. He did not answer. Outside, the mirror war raged on. Victory and illusion indistinguishable. As the flagship pivoted to launch the next feint, Alpharius stood at the viewport, helm under his arm. The silver veil glimmered before him like a broken mirror scattering starlight. In each fragment he saw a different legion, a different self, a different outcome. He wondered which one was real, or if reality itself had become just another deception. The cipher pulsed faintly, patterns dissolving into unreadable static. For the first time, Alpharius felt he was not weaving the labyrinth but wandering it, searching for an exit that might not exist. The silver veil thinned at last, its mist of mirrored signals fading into a stretch of cold, unreflective space. Beyond it waited a small, unremarkable system whose third planet circled a red dwarf, a world Alpharius had chosen as the site of his next council. To the fleet, it was a pause between operations, a chance to breathe. To Alpharius, it was the tightening of a knot. The mirror war had left more than wreckage in its wake. It had left fissures, subtle at first, now widening. The Hydra's heads were turning inward. The flagship descended into synchronous orbit above the red world. Its surface was nothing but scarred plateaus and dried seas, an old mining colony long abandoned. Within a buried command vault, Alpharius had prepared a chamber sealed against every kind of augury, every echo. Here, the legions in a circle would meet to hear what he called the final clarification. But among the captains, there was no sense of clarity, only the weight of secrets pressing toward collapse. Athea Chiron stood at the edge of the chamber, a silent observer allowed in by Alpharius's explicit order. She felt out of place among the towering Astartes, her mortal frame a frail quill among blades. Yet she sensed she was part of the pattern he meant to reveal. Her hands held a slate filled with signals from the anomaly ship, its 4-word message still burning in her mind. Hydra has many hearts. She had not slept since decrypting it. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she saw the words scrawled across the inside of her skull. Praetor Varn entered last. His armor was repaired but still scarred, as though bearing witness. The data cores he had carried from Calithor were sealed behind coded locks only Alfarius could open. His face was hard, but his eyes flickered with something she had not seen before, a kind of fatal acceptance. When Alfarius motioned him forward, he knelt, not as penance, but as acknowledgement. The Primarch's voice was low. "Rise, Varn. We are past gestures." The chamber sealed. Green lumen strips dimmed to a muted glow, casting Hydra-shaped shadows across the floor. Alfarius removed his helm and set it on the central table. Without the visor's glow, his face looked older, lines etched by more than time. He placed the cipher beside it. Its patterns flickered weakly, forming and unforming a heart pierced by many blades. "Brothers," he said, "the Mirror War has shown our strength. It has also shown our fault. We are not one head but many, and each head bites at the others." A murmur moved through the captains. Some shifted uneasily, others stared straight ahead. Varn raised his chin. "Then speak the truth plainly, Lord. Have we become traitors or saviors?" Alfarius's eyes flicked to him. "Both," he said. "Neither. We are the hand that corrects, even when the correction looks like poison." His tone was calm but iron beneath. "But poison seeps inward too." He gestured and Athea stepped forward, displaying the anomaly's transmissions. She projected the last burst into the air. "Hydra has many hearts." The phrase pulsed green in the dim chamber. A whisper ran through the captains. One muttered. Another cell. Another hissed. "An imposter." Alfarius raised a hand and silence fell. "This," he said, "is the proof of what I have long suspected. We are no longer a single legion. We are 1,000 shadows moving in near-perfect unison, each believing itself the true reflection. Some of those shadows may act against us without knowing." Varn took a step forward. "You built us that way," he said quietly. "Masks within masks. How can you be surprised if some wear theirs too long?" Athea watched Alfarius closely. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I am not surprised. I am only deciding what must be done." He looked at Varn. "Your betrayal at Calithor was a fracture. Yet from it I glimpsed the pattern's heart. Now we stand at its center." He turned to the cipher, touching it lightly. "Every head of the Hydra can strike, but when they strike each other, the body dies. We must decide if we are to coil inward or strike outward one last time." The captains exchanged glances, the weight of the choice pressing like gravity. In the silence, Athea felt the Legion's identity shudder, as if a structure too long under strain had begun to crack. Varn spoke again, louder now. "Then give us one truth, Lord. Are we fighting for the Imperium or against it? Are we servants of the War Master or of some prophecy only you read?" Alfarius met his gaze. "We are fighting for the possibility that the galaxy survives its own lies," he said, "even if it means we are forgotten." He looked around the chamber. "That is the only truth I can give you." A captain to the left slammed a gauntlet on the table. "We bled, brothers, on Calithor without knowing why. We whisper oaths, but no longer know to whom." Another growled agreement. The murmur rose, a low growl of discontent. Athea felt the air tighten. Alfarius raised his hand but did not speak. Instead, he activated the cipher. Its patterns flared bright for the first time in days, projecting an image above the table. The entire Alpha Legion network, cells, operatives, hidden fleets, each a green spark connected by threads of light. As they watched, the threads began to break, sparks winking out. "This," he said, "is what happens when unity becomes only secrecy. We are dissolving." Varn's eyes narrowed. "Then why keep weaving?" Alfarius looked at him with something like sadness. "Because the alternative is chaos without pattern, and in chaos, all die." He closed his hand, and the projection vanished. "But perhaps," he said softly, "we have reached the point where the pattern itself is the cage." Silence fell. The captains stared at their Primarch, at each other, at the faint Hydra shadows flickering on the walls. In that moment, Athea sensed the Legion's myth tremble. If Alfarius spoke one more word, it might break entirely. She realized he had brought her here not as a scribe, but as a witness. Alfarius straightened, gathering his helm. "We launch for the next operation at dusk of this system's orbit," he said. "Until then, you will hold your positions and speak no further." His tone brooked no debate. The captains bowed stiffly, some out of habit, some out of caution. Varn lingered, eyes locked on Alfarius. Something unspoken passed between them before he turned and left. The chamber emptied until only Alfarius and Athea remained. The cipher pulsed weakly, its patterns fading. She looked at him. "They're breaking," she whispered. "We're breaking." He did not look at her. "A Hydra can survive many wounds," he said, "but its heart is another matter." He picked up the cipher and slipped it into a pouch at his belt. "Prepare the ghost signals. We may need them sooner than expected." As they walked out together, Athea glanced back at the table where his helm had rested. The shadows on the wall looked less like Hydra heads now, and more like cracks spreading across glass. She wondered if any pattern could hold a legion built on masks once the masks began to fracture. Outside the vault, the red dwarf glimmered faintly, casting blood-coloured light through the viewports. It felt like the glow of a dying heart. Varn stood in the corridor beyond, waiting. He inclined his head slightly to Athea but did not speak. His eyes said enough. "We are all in the labyrinth now." She passed him without a word, feeling the weight of unseen threads tightening. Behind her, Alfarius's footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if each one sealed another decision. Above them, the flagship drifted in orbit, its engines silent, a serpent coiled around an invisible wound. For the first time since she had joined the Legion, Athea wondered if the prophecy was not about victory at all, but about collapse, about the moment when deception devours itself and leaves only ghosts. She touched the edge of her slate, where the 4 words still glowed faintly. "Hydra has many hearts." In the red light they looked like a warning written in blood. The red dwarf hung above the dead world, like an ember caught in ash, its light staining the fleet a dull blood orange. Below, buried in the planet's crust, lay the old mining vaults Alfarius had converted into his hidden council chamber. Above, circling the orbit like steel vultures, a loyalist strike force had emerged out of the Silver Veil's confusion. Their arrival had been anticipated, yet their precision unsettled even the seasoned legionaries. They had not come blind. Someone had guided them. Whether it was the anomaly ship, another cell, or destiny itself, no one could say. The siege began without banners or warning, just a slow tightening of orbits, a ring of silent hulls aiming guns into the dust-choked sky. On the flagship, Alfarius stood at the viewport and watched the Loyalist fleet maneuver. Each ship moved like a chess piece guided by an unseen player, their formation disciplined, unhesitating. In his mind, the cipher's patterns replayed. Hydra heads splitting, hearts pierced, mirrors breaking. He felt the labyrinth's weight pressing inward. This was not the Mirror War's fluid chaos. This was an encirclement, deliberate and final. In the Strategium, the hololithic map glowed with enemy vectors converging on the red world. Every line was a blade closing toward the heart. Athea Chiron sat at her console, lips pressed tight, weaving counter-orders and phantom transmissions. Her hands shook only when hidden beneath the desk. For weeks, she had painted illusions across the void, but the Loyalist now moved as if immune to her craft. Each false signal she released flickered and died, countered by some unseen intelligence. She whispered numbers like prayers, trying to find a gap, a flicker of ignorance. None appeared. She felt as though she were drawing maps on water while the current swept them away. Praetor Van paced the hangar bay, armoured and armed, a silent storm contained in ceramite. Around him, squads prepared for deployment into the vaults below, an inversion of usual tactics. They would not board the enemy this time. They would hold ground in tunnels and corridors carved from forgotten ore. It felt alien to them, these warriors of infiltration and phantom strikes. Yet Alfarius had ordered it. We become the fortress we once undermined. Van touched the scarred edge of his gauntlet, thinking of Calithor, of the data cores, of the Aquila left behind. Redemption, damnation, it no longer mattered. Only the pattern remained. In the command vault, Alfarius assembled his captains. Shadows pooled in the corners like ink, the red dwarf's light filtering through narrow slits. He removed his helm and placed it on the table beside the cipher. Its patterns flickered weakly, forming a circle of broken chains. "Brothers," he said, voice low but carrying, "the enemy closes. They know where to strike. We will not meet them in open void. We will let them come to ground, into the labyrinth we have prepared." His eyes swept over them. Every corridor is a coil, every chamber a mouth. Let them believe they are hunting the serpent. Let them step into its jaws. The captains murmured assent, but their voices lacked conviction. Even here, in the inner council, the fracture showed. Some glanced at Van as if blaming him for the siege. Others avoided Alfarius's gaze entirely. Athea felt the tension like a current running beneath the floor. She stood silent, holding her slate, recording everything yet belonging nowhere. She wondered if she would survive the siege or vanish as another unmarked ghost. Above the planet, the Loyalist fleet began its bombardment. Slow, probing strikes meant to test shields and flush out hidden batteries. The flagship's void shields flared green, absorbing the first salvo, but the tremor shook dust from the vault's ceiling. Legionaries sealed hatches and moved into their assigned coils, each squad knowing only its fragment of the plan. In the tunnels, they planted traps and blind corridors, memory-coded locks, false bulkheads leading to dead ends. The mining colony became a living snare shaped by Alfarius's will. Athea remained in the command vault, coordinating signals between dispersed cells. Her console flickered with layered maps of the tunnels, green threads winding like veins beneath the planet's crust. Yet even as she directed the Legion's coils, she felt another pattern overlaying hers, a subtle echo in the Loyalist's signals, a ghost of her own style. The anomaly ship again, or something worse. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing herself to focus. Varne led the first squads into the lower levels, moving like a shadow through corridors lit only by emergency lumens. He issued orders with clipped precision, setting ambushes, sealing doors. Legionaries obeyed without question, but their silence carried unease. In a narrow passage, one whispered, "We are the serpent devouring itself." Another hissed the oath to silence him. Varn heard it all and said nothing. He had become a blade within Alpharius's hand, and blades do not question. As the Loyalists deployed drop pods into the upper stratosphere, Alpharius stood alone at the viewport. He sealed his helm slowly, the hiss echoing in the empty strategium. He thought of the prophecy once more. When the serpent devours itself, the end begins. Perhaps this siege was not an end, but a reflection, a chance to see the Legion's true face. He touched the cipher, now cool and faint, its patterns unreadable. "Not yet," he whispered, but the words felt like ritual more than resolve. Athea's console chimed. "They're inside atmosphere," she reported. Her voice cracked for the first time. "Multiple vectors, coordinated descent." Alpharius's visor turned toward her. "Good," he said. "Let them come." He moved to the center of the vault, every inch the master of deception. "Signal all cells. Phase Hydra coil inverted. We become the maze." Deep below, Varn's squads heard the coded signal and moved into position. Doors sealed behind them, traps armed. The tunnels thrummed with energy as power rerouted to hidden grids. The mining colony was no longer a relic. It had become a serpent's body, each passage a muscle waiting to contract. In the dim light, Varn drew his blade and whispered the oath, feeling its words sink like stones into his chest. Redemption or damnation, he would fight as silent brother one last time. The first Loyalist drop pod struck the surface, plumes of dust rising like muted explosions. From orbit, it looked like the planet exhaled. In the tunnels, the shock tremors rolled through walls and floors. Legionaries waited in darkness, their visors dimmed, bolters ready. Through hidden lenses, Varn watched the first squads of Loyalists enter the upper levels. Bright armor, disciplined movements, banners muted by dust. They advanced like surgeons into a patient, unaware of the knives waiting beneath the skin. On the flagship, Athea coordinated false signals, luring the invaders into chosen paths. Yet with each transmission she felt resistance, as though another hand were pushing back, adjusting her lures. The anomaly's ghost whispered at the edge of her data, mimicking her codes, sometimes outpacing them. Sweat beaded on her forehead. She felt like a player in a game where the board kept shifting under her fingers. Alpharius moved between stations, offering calm words, adjusting patterns with small gestures. His presence steadied the crew, but inside his armor, his heart beat heavy. He sensed the Legion's spirit fraying under strain, each brother holding his own private doubts like a hidden wound. Victory here would not mend the fracture. It might widen it. Yet he had chosen this path long ago. A Hydra cannot be uncoiled halfway. Dust rained from the vault ceiling as another salvo struck above. Athea looked up and met Alpharius's visor. "They're deeper now," she said. "They're following the ghosts exactly where you wanted." He inclined his head. Then the jaws closed. He signaled a code only Varn and a few others would understand. In the tunnels, hidden bulkheads slammed shut, cutting the invaders off from retreat. Power grids shifted, flooding passages with blinding light, sealing others in darkness. The serpent contracted around its prey. But in one corridor, a Loyalist squad moved with uncanny precision, bypassing traps as if they had the map. Varn saw them on his visor feed and felt a chill. "They know," he muttered. He rallied his squad, preparing to intercept. For a moment, he hesitated. Was this the anomaly cell, or another reflection? Then he charged, bolter roaring, leading his brothers into the breach. The tunnels erupted in echoes of gunfire and shouted codes. In the command vault, the cipher pulsed once, bright and sharp, forming a hydra whose heads were severing each other. Alpharius's hand hovered over it. He thought of Varn in the dark, of Athea at her console, of the loyalists moving like surgeons through his maze. He wondered which head he was now, the one striking or the one being struck. Outside, the red dwarf flickered, casting long shadows across the fleet. Inside, the silent siege tightened. The serpent's jaws had closed, but Alpharius felt no triumph. Only the pressure of a heart beating against its own coils, waiting for the fracture to finish its work. The fortress moon lay shattered beneath the Alpha Legion's silent grip. Its upper towers still glowed with fires of loyalist ordnance, but within its tunnels the Legion moved like a coiled predator, each squad perfectly synchronized, each passage mapped and trapped. Alpharius had orchestrated the siege with precision. Yet now, as the last loyalist remnants scrambled for escape, he sensed the labyrinth was changing on its own. The anomaly, the ghost, or some unforeseen hand, had introduced a variable. Even the Hydra, once a symbol of control, seemed to shift beneath his gaze, coiling with new intent. Athea Kieran's console glimmered faintly. She traced vectors of remaining loyalist forces, filtering false signals from genuine threats. Her fingers hovered over the activation codes for the final phase, the hydraulic locks and detonation sequences set to seal corridors behind the enemy. She felt a tremor of hesitation, not fear, but the weight of inevitability. She was no longer just a weaver of illusions. She was a gatekeeper, a warden of lives, a conductor in a symphony of deception. Each choice she made rippled through the tunnels, through the minds of legionaries, through the very pattern Alpharius had laid. She swallowed and activated the first set of closures. Varn led his squads deeper, following the phantom signals to intercept loyalist survivors. Bolters spat fire into shadows. Grenades detonated with muted shudders that vibrated through the tunnels, and corpses, or what might have been illusions, scattered across the floors. He pressed forward with grim resolve, feeling the oath of silent brothers echo faintly in his chest. He had betrayed Alpharius once, yet now he was the blade in the Primarch's hand, striking with precision and restraint. Every loyalist movement seemed preordained, as if the corridors themselves guided him. Yet somewhere, at the edge of perception, he felt a reflection, a squad moving perfectly in step, but not his own. Was it another cell, or the ghost reaching back to mock him? Above, Alpharius stood at the Strategium viewport, helm under one arm, the cipher glowing on its pedestal. Its patterns had evolved into a hydra whose heads now seemed untethered, moving independently, striking at one another. Alpharius's mind traced each thread, aligning strategies with contingencies, yet he realized with a pang that even he could not account for everything. The Legion was a living organism, but like all living things, it was unpredictable. The Mirror War had created fractures, and now those fractures were beginning to bite. Athea detected a residual signal, a loyalist officer attempting a counter-breach, moving with uncanny foresight. She sent a phantom squad to intercept, feeding false coordinates, while Varn's squad moved to the real engagement. Her hands trembled slightly. The ghost seemed alive, anticipating her every move. Alpharius glanced at her and inclined his head. "Trust your instincts," he said. The labyrinth does not forgive hesitation. In the tunnels, loyalist squads collided with the Legion. Gunfire rang out, echoing off carved stone and metal supports. Screams were muffled by distance and vacuum, but they resonated in the minds of the legionaries as if amplified. Varn moved among them like a shadow, Bolter spitting bursts of green tracer into the enemy's formation. At every junction, he ensured the enemy moved toward dead ends or traps. Even in the heat of battle, the oath reminded him. Each strike, each breath, each life taken was part of the pattern. He pushed doubt aside and continued. Alfarius activated a secondary feed, showing thermal projections of loyalist command centers still attempting to coordinate. Each projection blinked under the weight of sabotage and phantom signals. He whispered, "Hydra uncoiled." The words were not triumph, but observation. Even as the labyrinth contracted, even as loyalist forces fell into its jaws, he knew the Hydra's true power was not in death, but in reflection, the way it forced all participants to see themselves in shadows. He thought of Varn, of Athea, of every brother in the tunnels, and understood that this victory carried a cost that could not yet be measured. Varn's squad had reached the innermost vaults, where data cores and intelligence caches awaited. Each core glimmered with encrypted light, the sum of secrets the Imperium had buried here. He knelt and began extraction, Bolter slung across his back. Every movement was precise, every gesture calculated. He felt the weight of Alfarius's gaze across the void, even though the Primarch was miles away. Each extraction carried risk. The corridors could collapse, traps could trigger, the ghost could intervene. Yet Varn's hands did not shake. He whispered the oath once more, letting it ground him. Athea monitored the extraction feed. One of the loyalist squads had unexpectedly rerouted, following a pattern she had not anticipated. She activated a phantom blockade, sealing corridors in real time while feeding misinformation. The signal flickered, then stabilized. Relief touched her briefly, replaced immediately by the awareness that she had been part of a war, played in reflections and shadows. She had become more than Weaver. She had become the labyrinth itself. Alfarius observed the unfolding siege, noting every head of the Hydra in real time. He could not intervene directly. The purpose of this phase was to test his legion, to reveal the fractures, to see which would endure. The cipher pulsed faintly, almost sympathetically, a reminder that every deception had consequences. He thought of the prophecy, of the serpent devouring itself, and wondered if the Hydra's many hearts had begun to beat against him instead of for him. As loyalist resistance collapsed, Varn oversaw the final sweep. The corridors were silent except for the echo of bolter impacts and the faint hiss of released energy. He and his squad moved like ghosts themselves, leaving no trace but bodies and disrupted intelligence. Each step forward felt like a betrayal and a redemption, intertwined. Athea transmitted final confirmations to the flagship, the codes aligning perfectly with Alfarius's master pattern. She exhaled softly, knowing that the Hydra coil had reached its crescendo. Alfarius returned to the viewport, looking down on the shattered corridors below. Fires flickered along the surface, casting long shadows through breached windows and collapsed ceilings. The labyrinth had worked. The enemy had been trapped, misled, and scattered. Yet Alfarius felt no triumph. The Hydra had uncoiled, yes, but the hearts within it had begun to pulse independently. Shadows that had once obeyed now questioned, reflected, and hesitated. He touched the cipher lightly, sensing the echoes of every choice made this day. Varn exited the tunnels, squad intact, data cores secured. He paused for a moment to glance at the ruins, the silent witnesses of the Legion's design. Somewhere in the labyrinth, he knew, a loyalist officer still lived, carrying only a memory of the ghosts that had destroyed his forces. Varn felt the weight of the victory settle upon him, a burden almost as heavy as guilt. He whispered the oath once more, though it felt hollow against the truth of what they had done. Athea finally stepped away from her console. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, yet she understood the labyrinth's final lesson. The Hydra coil had succeeded in form, but revealed fractures in substance. Alpharius's voice, low and almost tender, reached her across the bridge. The pattern holds, but at what cost? She looked at him, knowing she had been as much a part of the outcome as any legionary. He did not answer directly. The stars outside reflected faintly on his visor, green and gold, a reminder that the serpent always watches. As the fleet drifted in orbit above the red world, the Hydra had uncoiled. Every head had struck, every vein had pulsed, and yet the pattern remained unfinished. Alpharius closed his eyes briefly, considering the labyrinth that had become both weapon and cage. Below, Varne and the legionaries carried the Legion's secrets, shadows moving among shadows. Above, the cipher pulsed faintly, waiting for the next thread to be pulled. The war was not over. The Hydra had uncoiled, but its hearts were restless. The corridors of the fortress moon now echoed with the footsteps of hunters and hunted alike. Varn led the last squads through shadowed tunnels, each chamber still littered with the detritus of loyalist resistance. Bolters lay discharged, their barrels smoking faintly, while doors had been sealed behind them to trap those who had survived. The Alpha Legion had shaped the labyrinth into a snare, yet even as they moved, Varn sensed the maze twisting in ways he had not anticipated. The anomaly, the ghost, the unpredictable currents of fate. Something pressed at the edges of every calculation. For the first time, he wondered if he was a predator or a prey. Above, Alpharius surveyed the unfolding siege from the strategium. The cipher pulsed faintly beside him, its patterns forming a coiled hydra with one head broken, another striking. He traced the fractures with a gloved finger, each line a thread leading to an unknown outcome. Every betrayal has its mirror, he murmured. Every knife turned in darkness finds its mark. The Primarch's eyes scanned the fleet's telemetry, noting each signal, each ghost, each reflection of his design. Yet even he could not fully anticipate the currents now converging upon him. Athea Chiron worked furiously at her console, intercepting and rerouting the last loyalist transmissions. The anomaly ship's ghost had reappeared, shadowing Varn's path, adapting to her countermeasures with almost sentient precision. She felt a chill as she realized the reflection had learned their tactics, predicting actions before they were executed. Alpharius's voice, low and calm, broke the tension. "Do not underestimate it," he said, "nor should you hesitate. The Hydra teaches no mercy." She nodded, adjusting protocols in real time, weaving the next layer of deception into the labyrinth. Varn's squad approached the innermost vaults, where the highest value data cores were secured. Here, the Loyalists had concentrated the remnants of their intelligence. Encrypted maps, personnel files, battle reports, and hidden schematics. The air was thick with the scent of burning circuitry and scorched stone. Each step carried the weight of inevitability. Varn knew that his betrayal at Calithor had put him here, leading this final sweep. He whispered the oath of Silent Brothers under his breath, drawing strength from its cadence. even as the words felt hollow against the gravity of the moment. Suddenly, a loyalist officer emerged from a hidden passage, bolter raised, his eyes wide with desperation. Varn fired first, sending the weapon clattering across the floor, but the officer's gaze held a silent accusation. For a heartbeat, Varn saw himself mirrored in that face. Doubt, fear, and the weight of choices made. Alferis's words echoed in his mind. Every betrayal has its mirror. He restrained a second shot, instead pressing the officer to the wall, securing him for interrogation. The act was symbolic. Varn's hands, instruments of both deception and justice, balanced on a knife's edge. Alfarius activated the final feed from the command vault. On the hololithic projection, every squad's position lit up, showing the loyalist forces funneled into the labyrinth's dead ends. Yet new signals flickered, unknown, unanticipated ghosts moving independently of any Alpha Legion pattern. Alfarius's jaw tightened. The Hydra had uncoiled fully, yet now it threatened to bite itself. Varn, he spoke into secure vox. The last reflection moves against the pattern. Contain it. The praetor acknowledged, voice clipped. Every instruction was a thread pulled taut. Every decision a knife poised at the heart of the Legion. In the tunnels, Varn's squads intercepted loyalist escape pods, cutting off retreat routes with calculated precision. Yet one pod evaded capture, slipping through a hidden shaft. Varn felt a pang of unease. The anomaly, the ghost, perhaps even a loyalist trick of perception. It did not matter. The Hydra's mirror had created an outcome outside his control. He pushed forward, leading his men into the central vault, where the data cores pulsed with encrypted light, almost alive in their significance. Athea monitored the extraction, fingers flying across her console. She saw patterns forming within the loyalist signals, micro-decisions that could only have come from a mind anticipating their moves. Her pulse quickened. It's adapting, she whispered to herself. Alfarius's voice, calm and deliberate, resonated in the silent chamber. Then adapt with it. Let the labyrinth respond. She executed a sequence of countermeasures, sealing corridors, deploying phantom units, and rerouting Varn's squads. Every move echoed through the tunnels like a carefully placed note in a dark symphony. The loyalist officer captured earlier was brought before Alfarius in the command vault. The man trembled, expecting execution, but Alfarius only observed him, eyes narrowing. Tell me, the Primarch said softly, what do you know of the Hydra? The officer stammered, admitting partial knowledge of the labyrinth, unaware of the depths Alfarius had woven. Alfarius's gaze remained impassive, but within his mind, threads coiled tighter. Every lie revealed, every truth discovered, shaped the next reflection. In this silent confrontation, Varn's betrayal, the loyalist desperation, and the anomaly's interference converged. Varn entered the vault, data cores secured in reinforced carriers. He looked at Alfarius, unmasked, his face unreadable. The labyrinth holds, the Primarch said, but every heart moves within it independently. Varn nodded, understanding not just the operational meaning, but the philosophical one. Betrayal, loyalty, deception. They were all part of the same coil, and he had been both instrument and target. Athea released the final countermeasures, isolating rogue signals, neutralizing the anomaly's influence temporarily. The tunnels fell into controlled silence, except for the hum of equipment and the quiet footsteps of the legionaries. Alfarius studied the hololith, noting each reflection of the Hydra now realigned. yet he sensed the fractures beneath the pattern, the hearts moving on their own, threads tugging in directions not foreseen. Outside, the fortress moon glimmered in the dying red light, silent save for distant fires and scattered debris. The loyalist remnants were subdued, captured, or escaping into the void, none fully aware of the depth of deception they had been caught within. Alfarius stood at the viewport, helm under his arm, looking at the stars beyond the shattered world. The Hydra had struck, the labyrinth had closed, yet he felt no triumph. The betrayal had revealed truths he could not entirely control. Varn knelt before the central cause, whispering the oath one final time in this operation. The weight of past and present actions pressed upon him. The duality of redemption and guilt fused into a singular reality. Alfarius placed a hand on the pedestal, the cipher pulsing faintly, forming a coiled reflection of all actions taken: betrayal, obedience, survival, death. In that moment, he understood the final lesson. A hydra with many hearts could strike itself as easily as it struck its prey. Athea watched them, realizing the labyrinth's pattern was never static. Each reflection, each fracture, would continue to ripple long after this operation. The hydra had uncoiled, yet its hearts remained restless. Alfarius's gaze swept over the assembled legionaries, over Varn, over her, and he said quietly, almost to himself, "Now the true test begins." The orbit above the Red Dwarf was silent except for the distant hum of Alpha Legion engines. The fortress moon lay in ruins below, fires smouldering in the twisted spires and shattered corridors. Alfarius observed the devastation from the Strategium viewport, helm under one arm, the cipher glowing faintly beside him. Its patterns had evolved again. Hydra heads intertwining, breaking, reforming in shapes too complex to decipher at a glance. Each pulse seemed alive, a heartbeat echoing the Legion's own fractured rhythm. This was the moment when reflection met reality, when every hidden thread of loyalty and betrayal would converge in one final judgment. Varn led his squads through the vaults, carrying the secured data cores. Each corridor was a shadow of the labyrinth he had traversed hours before, yet now the echoes of his own actions followed him. He paused at intersections, listening to the silence, aware that even silence was a weapon in Alfarius's design. Every bolt fired, every door sealed, every phantom signal sent, threads in a web whose weight pressed down on his chest. He whispered the oath once more, as if invoking it might steady the labyrinth itself. Athea monitored all feeds from the command vault, her fingers dancing across the console with a precision born of desperation. She traced enemy movements, ghost signals, and residual anomalies. One particular signature pulsed irregularly, a loyalist squad moving with a method that mirrored Alpha Legion tactics. She frowned, realizing the reflection was not a misreading. "It knows us," she whispered. Alfarius's voice, calm and deliberate, answered from across the room. "Let it. The Hydra has many hearts. Every strike tests the coil." Alfarius called the captains to the inner sanctum, the command vault's lumen strips dimming to a muted green. Shadows pooled across the floor, echoing the Hydra carved in relief at the chamber's center. His eyes swept over the assembled legionaries, resting briefly on Varn. "We have uncoiled the Hydra," he began. "We have confronted mirrors of ourselves, threads of betrayal, echoes of deception. Yet even now, the test is incomplete. One final decision remains, and it will determine not just our success, but our identity." Varn stepped forward, carrying one of the extracted data cores. The weight of it seemed symbolic, as much as physical. "The labyrinth is complete, my lord," he said. "The loyalists are neutralized. The cores are secured." Alpharius inclined his head, but his expression was unreadable. "Secured, yes," he said softly. "But each heart we touched moves independently. Some may strike in ways we cannot predict. This is the final judgment." He gestured toward the vault, where a sealed chamber contained the last loyalist officer, alive but trapped within a web of observation grids. "Will you wield the final knife, or will the Hydra judge itself?" Athea's breath caught. She had expected this, yet the responsibility pressed on her chest like a stone. Every protocol she had implemented, every phantom fleet, every countermeasure now converged on this chamber. One wrong command, one miscalculation, and Varn, the loyalists, or even her own forces could be lost. Alpharius studied her, eyes reflecting the faint green pulse of the cipher. "Decision is not mine to make," he said. "It is yours to reveal, and ours to endure." She swallowed, fingers poised over the final override sequence. Varn knelt before the central chamber. He could see the officer's pale face, eyes wide, lips quivering. He felt the weight of his own betrayal and redemption, the duality of the Legion's path. "Are you prepared to see the truth?" Alpharius asked, voice low. "Yes," Varn whispered. He activated the override. Doors sealed with a hiss, energy grids flared to life, and a cascade of holographic barriers folded the chamber into a cage of impossibility. The loyalist officer was trapped, unable to move, unable to manipulate, rendered helpless by the labyrinth he had once hoped to penetrate. The cipher pulsed brighter, its Hydra pattern fractured, then reformed, entwining itself around the chamber in radiant threads. Alpharius observed in silence, the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders. He understood that in the Hydra coil's final phase, every reflection, every betrayal, every heart of the Legion had been tested. Now the measure of their unity, their obedience, and their survival would be revealed. Athea transmitted the final phantom signals, sealing off escape vectors, reinforcing the labyrinth's grip. She felt the anomaly signature flicker once, then disappear, absorbed into the patterns she had woven. For a moment, she allowed herself a breath. The Hydra had uncoiled fully, yet it was not a victory of force alone. It was a judgment, a test of hearts, wills, and loyalty. She realized the true weight of Alpharius' strategy. The Legion itself had become the trial. Varn watched as the trapped loyalist officer slumped, exhausted and resigned. There was no rage, no pleading, only recognition of inevitability. He felt the oath's resonance in that moment, understanding that obedience, deception, and betrayal were not absolutes, but tools. Every choice had led to this final alignment, this convergence of mirrors. He looked at Alpharius. "The Hydra judges well," he said quietly. Alpharius inclined his head, expression unreadable. The bridge of the flagship hummed with activity as the fleet maintained orbit above the red world. Shadows of ships flickered across sensors, each scale of the serpent coiled around the system like an invisible cage. Alpharius moved between stations, observing, adjusting, confirming that every thread remained intact. The labyrinth had not collapsed, yet he sensed its pulse had changed. The Hydra's hearts moved with subtle autonomy, echoes of choices made by legionaries, by Athea, by Varn. Even he could not see all of it at once. In the silent vaults, Varn and his squads withdrew, leaving the final chamber sealed. Every exit route had been controlled, every anomaly neutralized or redirected. The Loyalists were no longer a threat, yet the cost of their neutralization weighed like iron in the corridors. Varna whispered the oath again, not for obedience, but for grounding, for a semblance of certainty amid the uncertainty that Alfarius had engineered. Every heart of the Hydra had been tested. Every reflection had struck and been struck. Alfarius returned to the strategium, standing alone before the hololithic map. The Hydra pattern now glowed faintly, no longer fracturing but coiled with quiet intensity. It had survived the uncoiling, yet it bore the marks of each heart's independence. Alfarius understood the lesson fully. The Hydra was not merely a weapon, a pattern, or a strategy. It was a reflection of the Legion itself. Shadows within shadows, hearts within hearts, every thread tested, every blade poised. Athea stepped beside him, hands trembling but face composed. "The labyrinth holds," she said. Alfarius inclined his head. "Yes, but it has changed. Every heart we tested has left its mark." He paused, touching the cipher lightly. "Now, the final choice remains. The Hydra has judged, but the Primarch must decide which reflection endures, which path leads forward." She understood, in that moment, that this was no longer about loyalists, ghosts, or even the siege. It was about the Alpha Legion itself, its unity, its fracture, its future. Outside, the Red Dwarf flared briefly, casting long, blood-colored shadows over the flagship and the destroyed fortress moon below. In the quiet hum of the engines and the faint pulse of the cipher, Alfarius whispered, almost to himself, "Every heart tested, every mirror struck. The Hydra is uncoiled. Now comes the judgment." The Red Dwarf's faint light bathed the Alpha Legion flagship in a cold, spectral glow. Beyond the viewport, the remnants of Calithor's fortress moon smouldered like an ember. Its towers collapsed and tunnels sealed, the labyrinth complete. Alfarius stood alone at the strategium, helm under one arm, fingers resting lightly on the glowing cipher. Its patterns had ceased shifting, forming a final Hydra. Its heads coiled tightly, each piercing another, a self-contained loop of power and consequence. The coil was complete, yet Alfarius did not feel triumph. He felt the weight of every heart, every choice, every betrayal pressing inward, as if the Hydra had devoured not just the enemy, but its own soul. Varn emerged from the lower decks, data cores secured, limbs scarred, armor dented but intact. He approached the strategium with a measured gait, shoulders squared beneath the weight of unspoken deeds. Alfarius did not acknowledge him immediately, eyes fixed on the cipher's final pattern. The praetor understood without words. The labyrinth had revealed itself fully. Every loyalist, every shadow, every reflection had played its part. And yet, the Hydra's heart now beat with autonomy, each pulse carrying fragments of choice beyond Alfarius's command. Athea Chiron followed quietly, fingers still stained with the traces of phantom signals, codes, and countermeasures. She had been more than a scribe, more than a weaver. She had become a co-architect of the labyrinth, a guardian of its final alignment. Her mind raced even now, recalling the anomaly ship, the ghost reflections, and the independent pulses in the cipher. She felt the weight of history pressing against her, understanding that the siege, the mirror war, the Hydra coil, they were not merely battles, but the shaping of a legion's identity. Alfarius turned then, helm in hand, eyes reflecting faint green patterns from the cipher. "The coil is complete," he said, voice calm yet heavy with centuries of consequence. "Every heart has struck, every thread has tightened, and yet—" He paused, studying Varn and then Athea. "We are changed. Not all reflections remain within the pattern. Some have moved beyond it. Varn inclined his head. It is the nature of the Hydra. Many hearts, many wills, some beyond control. Alfarius nodded. And in that truth lies our future, and our burden. The fleet lay in orbit, shadows stretching across the red world, silent now except for the hum of engines. The ghosts of the Mirror War still lingered in sensors and residual signals, yet all had been contained, redirected, or absorbed. Alfarius traced the threads in his mind. Varn's betrayal and redemption, the Loyalist confusion and destruction, the anomaly ship's ghostly interference, Athea's unwavering precision. Each had left a mark on the Hydra, on the Legion, and on himself. The labyrinth was no longer a tool. It had become a living reflection of all who had touched it. Varn stepped forward, hands still trembling slightly from the exertion of command and battle. "My lord," he said quietly, "the Loyalists are neutralized, the data cores secured, every path controlled. The Hydra has judged itself." Alfarius inclined his head. "It has, and yet the final choice remains with the Primarch. The pattern shows potential outcomes, but we must decide which reflection endures." He gestured to the cipher, its Hydra now coiled inward completely, heads piercing hearts in a self-sustaining loop. Alfarius traced the lines with a gloved finger. Every life, every shadow, every betrayal is encoded here. We can preserve the pattern, or allow the Hydra to fracture and reveal its true independence. Athea stepped closer, voice quiet. "And if it fractures?" Alfarius did not answer immediately. He looked to the viewport, where the red dwarf's light cast blood-coloured reflections across the hull. "Then the Legion will endure, but not as we have known it. Every heart we tested will strike independently. The coil will hold, but the price is autonomy. Each brother, each reflection, acting beyond my command." He turned, eyes meeting hers. "Do you understand what that means?" She nodded. "It is both victory and loss." Alfarius inclined his head once. "Exactly." Varn's gaze followed the Primarch's hands over the cipher. He understood, finally, that this day had not only tested the Loyalists, but every heart within the Legion. Even Alfarius, the architect, had been tested. "And my path?" he asked. Alfarius's eyes softened, though the weight behind them remained. "You have acted within the coil. Your redemption is secured, yet your heart is now one of many. The labyrinth has claimed us all, in part, to forge the whole." The command vault fell silent, each individual processing the enormity of the Hydra's uncoiling. Legionaries in corridors and on decks waited, their breaths measured, awaiting orders that would now be guided as much by instinct as command. The coil was complete, but its autonomy meant that each reflection, each decision, each heartbeat carried potential consequences that no single mind could contain. Alfarius understood, perhaps more than any other, that the Hydra had become a living organism, its heads no longer entirely bound to his will. Outside, the red world turned slowly beneath the orbiting fleet. Fires still glimmered on the surface, a testament to destruction and precision alike. Shadows of Alpha Legion ships stretched across the moonscape, their shapes coiled in formation like a sleeping serpent. Alfarius moved to the viewport, helmet under one arm, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The Hydra had struck, the labyrinth had closed, and yet a pulse of uncertainty remained, a reminder that even in perfect deception, autonomy breeds unpredictability. Athea observed quietly, understanding that the Hydra's hearts now moved independently within the pattern. Her hands were steady, though her mind raced. The anomaly ship, the mirror wall, the hidden signals, all had tested the Legion's cohesion. Now the true test was whether they would endure when the reflections acted on their own. Alfarius had orchestrated the ultimate experiment, a legion whose obedience was absolute, yet whose hearts were increasingly free. Varn knelt briefly before the central table, whispering the oath of silent brothers, honouring both the dead and the living, the loyalist and the traitor, the ghosts and reflections that had passed through the labyrinth. Every choice, every strike, every deception had been accounted for in some way, yet some threads had moved beyond control. Redemption and betrayal now coexisted as inseparable forces. Alfarius touched the cipher one last time, feeling the final pulse of the coil. The Hydra was complete, its heads coiled inward, striking and reflecting, autonomous yet contained. Every heart of the Legion had been tested, every shadow accounted for, yet freedom within the pattern had been granted. The labyrinth was no longer just a weapon. It was a living testament to the Alpha Legion's design, their adaptability, and their will. He turned to Varn and Athea. The Hydra has uncoiled fully. The battle is over. The pattern endures, but its hearts are now free to move within it. The test is complete. We have survived, yet we are changed. Silence followed. Outside, the Red Dwarf's light flared briefly, bathing the fleet in crimson reflection. Alfarius allowed himself the faintest exhalation. The coil was complete. The Legion had endured. Yet even as they prepared to depart, he knew the next test would come. Always, inevitably, in the pulse of the Hydra's many hearts.